Hi, everybody. Some bonds are never broken, only hidden, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The invisible thread quietly tightens as Toan's lost memories begin to return, one fragment at a time, carrying both warmth and pain. Faces once blurred now come into focus, and among them, Lytudiep stands unchanged, still there, still waiting, still loving. While Toan struggled in the darkness of forgetting, Lytudiep endured in silence. Her perseverance was not loud or demanding. It was steady, gentle, and unwavering. Every tear she shed, every day she chose not to give up, became part of the thread that guided him back. As memories resurface and hearts tremble once more, fate asks its question again. When love survives loss, time, and suffering, is it no longer a choice, but destiny itself?
There are bonds in life that cannot be seen, touched, or explained. They do not announce themselves loudly, nor do they demand to be remembered. They simply exist, quiet, persistent, like a thin, invisible thread that stretches across time, distance, and loss. Even when memory fades, even when hearts are bruised by separation, that thread does not break, it waits. Toan did not remember when it began to unravel. All he knew was that he woke up each morning with a strange emptiness tucked beneath his ribs, a hollow ache that coffee could not cure and routine could not silence. His days were orderly, almost peaceful. He worked, he smiled politely, he spoke when spoken to. Yet at night, when the world slowed down, a restlessness crept in. In his dreams, there was always a woman standing at a distance, her face blurred, her eyes heavy with unspoken emotion. He never knew her name, but waking without her left him breathless, as if he had lost something precious all over again. Far away, Lytudiep lived a life that looked ordinary to anyone passing by. She woke early, tended to small daily responsibilities, and learned to smile through quiet endurance. People often said she was strong, but they did not know the weight she carried inside. Her strength was not loud. It was woven from patience, from waiting without certainty, from loving someone who might never remember her again.
Sometimes, in the most mundane moments, folding laundry, watching traffic lights change, Diem would pause. Her heart would tighten for no clear reason, as if something far away had shifted. She never questioned it. She simply placed a hand over her chest and breathed, trusting that the feeling meant something, even if she could not see what. And somewhere, on an unremarkable afternoon, Toan stood still in the middle of a crowded street. A familiar scent passed by, soft, fleeting, and his heart reacted before his mind could catch up. For a brief second, the world tilted. His chest ached, his fingers curled, and a name hovered just beyond his reach. He did not know it yet, but the invisible thread had begun to tremble. Fate, patient as ever, was gently pulling them closer, one quiet heartbeat at a time.
Memory rarely returns in a rush. It does not burst through the door demanding to be recognized. Instead, it knocks softly at inconvenient moments when the heart is least prepared. For Toan, it began with small, almost laughable things. A melody playing in a cafe, the warmth of sunlight on his shoulder, the sound of laughter drifting from a nearby table. Each detail felt strangely familiar, as if it belonged to a life he had once lived but could no longer fully enter. One morning, as he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, his hand froze midair. The motion itself felt rehearsed, as though someone else had once sat across from him, watching, smiling. His chest tightened, not with pain, but with longing. He could not explain it, and that frightened him more than the emptiness ever had. The world he knew felt solid, logical, but these feelings were not. They arrived without permission, leaving behind questions he could not answer. At night, the dreams changed. The blurred figure began to move closer. He noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the quiet sadness in her smile, the strength hidden beneath her gentleness. Sometimes she reached for him, and he woke just before their hands touched, his heart racing, his pillow damp with unshed tears. He started writing fragments of these dreams down, afraid that if he didn't, they would disappear again.
Meanwhile, Diem felt the shift long before she heard any news. Her days grew heavier, but not with despair, with anticipation. It was as if the air around her had become charged, humming with something unfinished. She caught herself looking at her phone more often, rereading old messages she never deleted, even though they led nowhere. Each memory hurt, yet she held on to it like proof that love had once been real, and perhaps still was. People told her to move on. Life, they said, does not wait. But Diem understood something they did not. Moving on does not always mean letting go. Sometimes it means standing still, trusting that what is meant to return will find its way back. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the window, Toan paused before a mirror. For the first time, he asked himself a dangerous question. Who was I before I forgot? The answer did not come, but the silence felt different now, less empty, more expectant. Somewhere in that quiet, the invisible thread tightened again, whispering that the past was not finished with him yet, and neither was she.
There is a cruel irony in remembering. When the mind begins to heal, the heart is often the first to ache. For Toan, the return of memory did not arrive as a clear picture, but as a storm of sensations, sudden, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. A name would surface in his thoughts without warning, then vanish before he could grasp it. A familiar pain would settle in his chest, heavy and insistent, as though something precious had been lost twice. One afternoon, while walking past a small roadside stall, he stopped abruptly. The scent of boiled corn drifting through the air struck him like a wave. In an instant, he saw an image, an old kitchen, steam rising, a gentle voice calling him to eat before work. His knees weakened. He had to hold on to the stall's wooden post to steady himself. Tears filled his eyes, not because he fully understood the memory, but because it felt sacred. Someone had once cared for him in ways that went beyond words. From that day on, the fragments grew sharper. Faces gained outlines, emotions gained names. Love, regret, fear, longing, all returned together, demanding to be acknowledged. He began to remember the feeling of being needed, of belonging somewhere, of having someone wait for him at the end of a long day. And with those memories came guilt. While he had been lost inside his own mind, someone else had been lost in waiting.
Diem, too, carried her own quiet battles. Perseverance is not loud. It does not announce itself. It shows in the way she rose every morning, went to work, helped her grandmother, and smiled at strangers, even when her heart felt unbearably tired. At night, she allowed herself to miss him. She replayed conversations in her mind, wondering if he was warm enough, safe enough, alive enough to remember her. There were moments when she almost gave up, when exhaustion whispered that hope was foolish, that life demanded certainty, not faith. But then she would recall his voice, the way he once said her name, and something steady would return to her chest. Love, she realized, was not only about being together. Sometimes it was about enduring the distance without becoming bitter. As Toan sat alone one evening, clutching the notes he had written about his dreams and memories, one truth became undeniable. Forgetting had protected him, but remembering would change everything. The life he was reclaiming came with responsibility, with the need to face what he had left behind. The invisible thread no longer tugged gently. It pulled, firm and unyielding, guiding him toward a choice he could no longer postpone, whether to keep running from the past or to walk back toward the woman who had never stopped waiting.
Some reunions happen with laughter. Others arrive quietly, like a breath held for too long and finally released. When Toan decided to return, there was no dramatic announcement, no certainty, only a deep, trembling resolve born from memories that refused to stay silent. The invisible thread had done its work. It had led him home, not to a place, but to a person. The village looked unchanged, yet everything felt different. The narrow road, the low houses, the familiar fields, ordinary scenes of daily life now stirred something profound in him. He remembered walking these paths with a lighter heart, remembered promises made under an open sky. Each step forward felt heavy, as if the past were walking beside him, asking to be acknowledged. Diem was in the yard when she saw him. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Hope has a way of disguising itself as illusion. But then he stopped, standing just beyond the gate, unsure whether he had the right to step inside. Their eyes met. The world seemed to pause, allowing silence to speak where words could not.
She did not run. She did not cry out his name. Instead, she stood there, breathing, as though afraid that one sudden movement might cause him to disappear again. Toan felt his throat tighten. In that moment, all his fear, of rejection, of forgiveness, of truth, rose to the surface. "I remember," he said at last. His voice was unsteady, but honest. "Not everything, but I remember you. I remember loving you." Tears finally fell, not as a flood, but slowly, like rain soaking into dry earth. Diem stepped forward, each movement careful, measured. Life had taught her that love, once broken, must be handled gently when it returns. She looked at him, searching his face, not for the man he used to be, but for the man standing before her now. Forgiveness did not come as a single word. It unfolded in small gestures, the way she listened, the way she allowed him to explain, the way silence no longer felt like punishment. They spoke of his mother too, of mistakes, of consequences, of wounds that might never fully heal. Diem understood then that forgiveness was not forgetting. It was choosing not to let pain define the future. As evening fell, they sat together, sharing a simple meal. The sound of everyday life, dishes clinking, distant voices, the hum of insects, napped around them. Nothing extraordinary happened, and yet everything had changed. The invisible thread had not promised a perfect ending. It offered something more real, a chance to begin again, slowly, imperfectly, with memory, perseverance, and love woven tightly together.